Hello and welcome to another episode of a Wicked Parley. Today we're going to be discussing mob mentality. Is it important and is it happening in the society today? The obvious answer is yes. All right. Well,
Talk about yikes.
Is it a yikes? Is it a yikes?
Yeah, sometimes.
I don't know. Once again, I want to say, hey, thank you guys all for checking us out. And if you guys are watching in the future, cool. Please hit the like and subscribe if you haven't. And if you guys have any general things to say, go ahead and join us and say something in the chat. And if you want to talk to us, we are once again utilizing Discord function. So while we're having this discussion, instead of
typing, one person in the Discord already.
Okay, but if you want to say something instead of just typing it up, you can actually hit us up with a question. You can discuss it here and now. So just letting you guys know that. And if you guys watch in the future, don't be worrying about it. We're going to keep on doing what we're going to do. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's the way it is. Host, yes. Is that bees? I'm not sure. I don't know.
What's bees?
Yeah,
that looks like bees.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Kyle. Welcome back. Welcome, host. Good to see you guys both. Checking things out. All right, cool. So, like I said, if you guys have any questions or comments or things like that you'd like to talk about, feel free to join the Discord. It's the same principles as last week, where one question, or comment, and then you basically would rotate through if you'd like to continue participating. But just keep in mind, this is not going to be like the call-in show where you can keep on doing that like 100% the whole way through, just because there are things I want to make sure we get to. So
yeah, so like every couple of minutes or something.
Yeah. So, but we'll be fair about this. We'll see how it goes. Okay. All right. So mob mentality. This is something that I think everybody has had some experience with at some point in their lives. The idea of mob mentality actually dates back to two social psychologists, if you think about it, from the early 1800s. One is named Gabriel Tarde, and the other is Gustave Le Bon. Both of them, more or less, put forth the principles that are often understood and recognized today as, mob mentality and whatnot. There is an article that I will be reading on our Patreon and going into a little bit more detail with. So if you guys want to check out our Patreon and see what we're going to have, it'll be posted there sometime in the coming week. Okay, so, when it comes to discussing the elements of mob mentality, we've heard of the sheeple people. We've heard of the ideas that are like conformity, and what those all kind of wrap together and entail is essentially a group of people who are chaotic in nature. These people typically don't really have much individualistic identity. They only take on the identity of whatever group they are a part of. Oh my god. Yeah.
It fits.
It's a horrible picture. My god.
It fits though sometimes.
Yeah, it's true. Honestly, when you think about the ways in which people often interact, you see lots of people kind of chiming into other people's ideas. And this can kind of create the first of many problems, which I believe to be is an echo chamber effect. Often people will stay to a specific group in which they feel particularly comfortable, particularly safe. And the same message is basically spread throughout the entire group in an echo chamber-esque effect. This effectively means that the people who are part of this group have very little identity, have next to no direct opinions of their own, and are being controlled by whomever is leading this particular group. And often, people who lead groups like this can operate in the shadows because they use the crowd to mask their manipulation and control.
Sounds like cannon fodder or meat shields.
You could think of it like that. That's certainly one way to look at it. Politicians do this all the time, as we know, right? But, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what are some of the things that you particularly find problematic about this particular aspect of mob mentality?
The fact that people can just control the mobs and have them do their dirty work.
Yeah. Like, is there more to it than just that? I mean, because like, I don't think anyone, I think everyone who hears that is like, yeah, I'm not on board with that at all.
It's just like a lot of it can get very, very violent very, very quickly.
Yeah, that's very true, as we've seen from Black Lives Matter protests,
Hmm.
people who are pro-Trump or anti-Trump, and
Yeah.
various other political and social causes.
The fact that it
Typically,
can get so violent is kind of terrifying because how do you stop that?
well, a heavily armed presence can be a deterrent. Changing things in the way that essentially benefits the mob of people sometimes can work. It's their goal. Uh, I think that,
It's the goal, but not all of the time is it a good one.
yeah, I agree with you. I genuinely think that more often than not, mobs typically form from when social causes fail or do not achieve the results that they initially want. And I think that that is indicative of some of the systemic problems associated with mob mentality and the use of mob mentality tactics on social media platforms like Twitter. The idea of we're going to have this value, we come across someone who does not share that value, and we're just going to dogpile them. I don't think that is a way to have a conversation. I don't think that's a way to have a healthy interaction with society. And I think it says a lot about our character and says a lot about what we really value at the end of the day. Anyways, okay, so do we have anybody in the Discord waiting room?
Yeah, yeah, we do. Give
All
me
right.
1 second.
All right, and while we're grabbing that particular person, let's discuss another one of the particular elements that we've kind of already mentioned, which is conformity. How often does conformity take hold of a conversation? How often do people just flock to your particular mindset, or perhaps you flock to theirs, without having the time and the consideration to actually showcase what maybe you mean by that particular cause? And as such, it's important, I think, to take notice of the fact that we could be looking at the beginnings of a very severe social contagion. And with that being said, we'll go ahead and go on to the next little bit. Rose? Okay, so it seems like we're still waiting on the guest. So in the meantime, we'll continue on with the line of thinking. So when it comes to social contagions, which I'm sure you probably have heard at least a little bit, social contagions typically follow cultish-like ideology. They follow certain principles where you aren't able to ask questions. To me, this is the critical component of mob mentality in a nutshell. You blindly follow the actions of the group. You blindly think like what the people in the group think. And if you try to challenge the status quo, then you are annihilated. That, to me, is problematic. Okay, Rose, you're back?
Yes, I have returned.
Okay, who do we got on the other end?
Actually, they do not have a question or statement.
Oh.
They actually relayed to me that they will be using the chat for the most part.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, then that's fine. Okay.
Hmm.
No problem. All right, then. So, do we have, is there anyone else that's in that line, or is that just...
No, that was it.
Okay, cool. All right, well, no problem. Let's go on. Okay, so, as I was mentioning before, with conformity as part of the mob mentality, the ability to have a conscious thought isn't really there. Well, it's not just being able to have your own particular ideology and the fact that you can't challenge those particular opinions, but you utilize these particular tactics to intimidate others who are on the outside of this particular mob, and then sometimes they get embroiled in mob, opinions or viewpoints or statements, or maybe they're on the outside of looking at a particular, activist or social gathering, and they get pulled in. And now they're forced to also follow the rules or be destroyed. And
Yeah, like on the picture.
yeah, exactly. It's like, you don't agree with us? Well, now we got all of our knives and guns pointed directly at your throat.
Ooh, ooh, this one and the other one is just annoying.
Yeah, my goodness. Yeah, some of these images you got are pretty fantastic, Rose.
Oh, thank you.
So, I mean, I'm sure that you've probably heard of at least people conforming when it comes to certain particular values and principles associated with mobs. Would that be fair to
Yeah,
say?
yeah, a lot of people can be, joined for a common goal or trait or whatever the heck.
Hmm.
Sometimes they are peaceful, sometimes they are not. And by goodness, do I want to get away from that.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. I see that Kyle
And
has put a
yeah.
something in the chat. You want to go ahead and read it?
All right. Kyle states, how much is it characteristic obedience and how much is it fear of what the mob will do to you if you stand against them?
Mm. Oh, that's difficult to
I
really
mean,
say if you ask me. You know.
ba-bonk.
Well, I mean, here's the thing about, like, let's say like this picture, for instance, right? This is an internet lynch mob, right? But
Yeah.
the reason why there are mobs on the internet is because you have anonymity. You have the ability to hide behind essentially a screen. You don't have to have your real face or real picture or real name tied, and so you have that freedom to say things you would never say to another person directly to their face. And so when it comes to mob mentality in that particular aspect, I think that they're several steps removed from normal social behaviors, and as
Mhm.
such, they have a more likely ability or inclination to those particular types of thinking because it's all stems from emotion. And so I think it depends upon the real world dynamic. As for Kyle's direct question, that's hard to say because I think it is determined based upon the individual. Some people are extremely loyal and will do absolutely anything that you ask of them. They're
Ooh,
extremely obedient.
those ones are scary.
Yeah, it can be scary. I think that it's also it's an admirable trait to have, to be loyal and to do things. But I also think it's important to be able to ask and pose questions, and in that particular way, I think you have to kind of question those people in that way. And I think fear plays a part as well. Probably in all people. I sense that the reality of this is probably going to be highly variable amongst people, but you could also say that it's probably a combination of both. The percentage of which is more than the other, I think, is the thing that's going to really play the biggest factor in what's going to be different amongst people. And so, that's what my honest answer is when it comes to that. But I think I could be wrong too. So if you have an idea or an explanation, feel free to throw it in the chat. I'd like to see what you have to say. Okay. When it comes to host. Oh,
That's the one
host.
you, that's the one you saw?
Yes, I just saw that. Oh my goodness. So, all right, you almost got me there, host. I'm 1,000%. You almost derailed this train, that's for sure. Uh,
I would have put it back on the rail.
yeah, we're gonna put it back on though. So, when we talked about echo chambers, I think that one of the things that we kind of should discuss is the idea that perhaps certain desires aren't directly being met by the average public. And that's what really helps echo chambers along. They take that discontent and they sow seeds of doubt in the minds of people. And so, people who are in power, who are saying these certain things and trying to endorse these ideas, are often kind of cut. The legs are cut underneath them, if as it were. And in that way, you could think of it as this isn't really helping anybody. This is more like we're just touting the line, and people get hyper confused. And even I have more than once have I seen this, and I've kind of believed a couple things, and I was like, oh man, this must be it. And then I did some research, something that many people who are part of mobs don't get the opportunity to do, right? And I changed my mind. And I think that that's the reason why mob mentality is so dangerous, because that opportunity to change your mind about something isn't present. It's extremely lacking. And so,
One of us.
I know, one of us, one of us. And so it pushes people towards being highly polarized meaning that they're obviously at opposite ends of issues, and there isn't very few or in some cases none at all middlemen. And it creates a level of tribalism where we aren't able to really handle our particular issues. Instead, we get into our little tribes and we basically hunker down, and then we make strategic attacks on each other, trying to basically eliminate the other, but both are operating from fundamentally different ideologies with different sets of what are perceived truths. And that inherently is realistically the core of the issue more often than not when it comes to at least mob mentality that's dictated by tribalism. And I think that that type of behavior probably is seen a lot on Twitter in the modern day, and you see it often in political factions in various countries like the United States. And these things are extremely concerning, and to me, I think, is a bit too much. But okay, so I see that Kyle and Host both have things.
Yeah, Kyle's response was a response to the question I posed to the chat.
Okay.
The question was, what do you believe to be the most damaging aspect of a mob? Or what about the most beneficial? Trying to get a good and bad thing for a mob. So Kyle's response was, the most beneficial part of a mob, collective action. When an injustice occurs, a mob can force justice through the halls of power.
I see. I don't know if I believe that. I really don't. I don't think. I'll give you an example, right? You can take a look at the actions of, say, the civil rights movement of the late 50s and early 60s, right? On throughout most of basically American history here on out, right? The activism that was the most successful was the peaceful protest, things along those lines, right? Martin Luther King type of actions, right? The representatives who were more antagonistic, people like Malcolm X, who would condone violence in certain things, those people weren't as successful, because at the end of the day, fear does not change things. Fear only pushes people further down the road that they're already thinking. And so I don't really think that mobs that operate through intimidation and fear are going to succeed, regardless of their intentions. And so, to me, if I were to answer that question, I would effectively say that there is nothing beneficial about mobs. The only good thing that has come about mobs, to my understanding, and to be honest, I could be wrong. There are obviously vast gaps of knowledge that I have, but I think particularly during the late 1800s, during the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, the organization of people that were trying to fight for higher wages and more humane conditions, and rallied together in unions and created unions. And they often used mob mentality tactics to get those particular things. Were they successful? In the moment, no, not really. It took a really long time, and a lot of people died, and a lot of people were hurt, and a lot of people suffered before things were changed. And I think it was changed not because of the violence, but it was changed because more people became aware of the injustice. And so if you're going to be a mob and you're going to do things that are going to be bad, then you better hope that the injustice that you're basically operating under and basically trying to rally against is more potent than the damage you cause in trying to get your message out there. Because you could be...
Is it one of those weird thoughts about, negative publicity is still publicity?
I think that's probably where most people kind of fall to. But I definitely think that it's not the only. I mean, you could take a look at a mob of people when they overthrew the French, monarchy, and decapitated the monarchy.
Bye head.
Those people immediately went into famine, and many people lost their lives because of the conditions that the unstable nature of France at that time. And so like that's just one example that I can think of. But I see that
All right.
Kyle has his own example.
Yeah, but like we also have hosts.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's hear from Kyle because is he responding directly to the question that I asked?
Hmm. All right. So an example of both the good and bad of a mob, the Re- Rebellion of Constantinople. It led to the pardoning of two people sentenced to death, but also burned the city to the ground.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
See, to me, I feel like that's a bad thing because I guarantee you more than two people died because of that. Maybe they didn't die in the fire, but maybe they died because of conditions after the event that were directly caused because of the city being gone. you know, so I'm not sure that's
Goodbye.
necessarily a good and bad. That just sounds like a bad example. I don't think. I mean, who's to say that like even saving those two people necessarily saved them, right? Do you know if they lived like for a long time after the burning of the city? I'm assuming that it happened a long time ago, and so I'm not sure that's possible to know. But I mean, I think it stands to reason considering the chaotic nature of the world in the past when Constantinople was an actual large city and a power. Anyways, so let's go on to host.
Yeah. So host says mob mentality is like the ocean. It offers opportunity for those who know how, but also is unforgiving for no reason. Rogue waves can capsize the most capable of vessels. I don't know why I pronounced it like that.
It's okay. I've already pronunciated a few things weird, anyways. We're all good. at least you said it correctly where I misspoke. So,
Oops.
don't worry about it. You're good. Yeah, I mean, host. When it comes to that, I agree with that largely. That part I agree with. I think that. Yeah. I'm still thinking about like what Kyle said because like I'm like, man, can you imagine being like those two people who survived and you're alive, but you know that like other people were harmed and
Hard survivor's guilt.
yeah, exactly right. Survivor's guilt must play a huge factor in that.
Whew.
I think that the other thing to notice about mobs is the fact that like when you have a mob, right? You know how difficult it is to turn a mob around.
Probably a lot.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have mobs been stopped in human history where no one got hurt, where it just dispersed?
I mean, if it was actual peaceful dispersal, that wouldn't.
Be a mob, right? Like,
Not to me, at least. That's
yeah,
kind of just a peaceful protest where people actually know what their consequences of their actions are, you know?
yeah, exactly. I mean, like to me, like when I think of a mob, right? I'm thinking of people who are acting in more or less with one goal or maybe two goals in mind. They're willing to commit acts of aggression and violence and harm to other people, and they're resolute in their ideology. I don't really think that too many people who are operating under those conditions are going to be capable of peacefully just giving up. I think someone's getting bashed in or hosed down or something's happening to other people to snap them out of it more or less and able to then change course and pursue something else. It's not something that I think genuinely happens. And I also think it's because of the way in which, you know, people think when they're in the mob, right? When they're in a giant mob of people, most people think that they're protected, right? That because they're in a large group, that they're not going to be prosecuted, they're not going to be noticed, that their actions don't have consequences. Look at the LA riots that I would have classified as a mob of people who just destroyed things. That is a mob of people trying to take over the Capitol. Like that. Is what when I think of mob, that's what I think of.
Just some people go, wee!
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like these people are just freaking nuts, right? So when it comes to, and I mean that in the, you know what? Actually, I mean that exactly what I mean. Like they're fucking nuts, all right? Like I'm not gonna even try to be nice about it. Like if you went in and did something that stupid, it's nuts. People were hurt badly. Some people lost their lives. It's not fake news, as some people would like to call it. It's terrible. And so like I think that it's terrible, honestly. But the motivations behind why people do these things, I think, are deeply fascinating. Not only does like a mob speak to something primeval, right? That's like something at our core. There's an a common element that drags the attention of people and forces them to at least like face something that is almost like animalistic in nature. It's so easy for various people to, oh, I'm going to do this, and then they take on the emotions of the crowd, and then they just pursue whatever the group is going to pursue. It's the same reason why when you go watch animals on, in Africa on the savannah, and they're in a herd, they're trying to basically stay together for protection. It's no different when it comes to the ways in which people think and the reasons why mobs are dangerous. So, another thing I kind of want to get to is the fact that most mobs have a lack of direct focus outside of the initial goal, right? So let's take for an example, right, the mob that was storming the Capitol. All right, what exactly were they trying to achieve? Does anyone really know?
I'm not quite sure.
I mean, it seems like occupying the Capitol building was supposed to be at most an intimidation tactic to try and keep former President Trump, president. Outside of that, right, there was nothing specifically going on, right? So why did they need to break through barricades, harm people, break windows, basically, damage, public property to do this? Why couldn't it be a peaceful protest rather than this? I think the answer is it lacked an emotion. I think that they were all riled up, emotionally charged, and just wanting to do something. And they did all this without necessarily thinking about the consequences of it. And that's why several people were looking at jail sentences. Like, what do you think?
Everybody thinks they can just act without really, having consequences.
Yeah.
People thinking they're going to be that one or two that gets away.
Certainly.
Because unless, the authorities are completely 100% on top of it, one or two is going to get away.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a real lack of consideration here when it comes to the overall principles at play, the types of things that people are willing to just do. And I think that protection, once again, placates largely into that lack of consideration. There's this real sense within mob mentality that it's my way or the highway. And
I've got a quick question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if it completely fits with this topic, but it was something that I noticed a bit about peaceful protests versus mobs, specifically arrests.
Yeah.
Like, people are so incensed about how long it takes to actually arrest the people involved in a violent protest versus a peaceful protest. You got any opinions about it?
Do I have any opinions about it? Probably.
Probably.
Probably. I wasn't prepared.
I don't know. It's just something that popped in my head because we're talking about,
Yeah. I think that it depends on the particular circumstances of what's going on, right? Like, for instance, when the Roe v. Wade verdict came out, right? There were protests across the nation, including in Sacramento, California, where I reside. And they were a large group of angry people who were, more or less fighting for rights that they thought they had lost. And truthfully, they didn't lose any of those rights. It just became a states' rights issue, right? Mm-hmm. But I definitely understand where they're coming from, because it means that there are some states who are going to just make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for people who need an abortion to get one. Mm-hmm. And that's going to affect people's lives in a negative way. And I think that sucks. That's horrible. I understand that.
Yeah.
But I think that, like, if they were doing anything that's illegal, then it should be stopped. But the thing is that we live in a country where we have access to certain liberties, like free speech, and the ability to espouse an opinion. I don't like what I'm doing right now. I'm espousing an opinion. And what I'm doing is no different than if I were on a street corner with a microphone espousing my opinion. The only difference is that, well, no one will hear me on this one, or very few people will. But it's also more civil in my mind, because I'm not polluting the air, as it were, with noise that is unwelcome. But at the same time, I think people should have the ability to do that. And now I think that if you're a different kind of group and you're going too far, if you vandalize property, you firebomb places, for instance, which some people who were part of that particular protest did, then those people should be prosecuted, and they should be prosecuted quickly.
That's kind of terrifying.
Yeah. And so, like, I don't, when it comes to your question in general, I think that it's more like the specifics. Like, what particular groups do you have in mind that specifically did something, and what was the rationale behind what was said about it? Like, I need a little more to go off of than just...
Yeah, fair enough. People were kind of being mad at the fact that people were getting arrested at a protest that was interfering with traffic versus, actual vandalism, violent mobs,
Okay.
They were trying to make comments about how quick it was to arrest people with the peaceful protest versus the not peaceful one.
Gotcha, okay. Well, I mean, here's the thing, at the end of the day. In my particular opinion, I see those as equal levels of threat. If you are impeding the ability to move goods, you are costing people their livelihood or their lives. What happens if, a person is ill, injured, and you just shut down traffic, so now the ambulance has to take a longer way. That person, it takes longer for them to get medical treatment, which could cost them their life. That's one example that I can see as a reason why that's a problem. Or let's say there's a fire and you're blocking a fire vehicle from being able... Well, not just a fire hydrant, but like, let's just say hypothetically that some poor neighborhood, I do live in California once again, and fires are a reality, where a whole neighborhood lights up on fire. Now you've blocked the road, so that way now it takes longer for firefighters to get there, which means some more people are going to lose their homes, and the fire's going to spread and potentially get more out of hand. And those are just like basic things that are obvious to any person. But there's more than just that too. There's obviously like people's livelihoods could be sacrificed because you're blocking the transportation of those particular goods. So I think that there's lots of things to consider when it comes to something like that. And so to me, it's an equal level threat. There's a reason why after World War II, the United States built the highway and road systems the way they did, because they needed the ability to transport things around quickly. And that was a necessity. It's what allowed for our nation to become what it is today. So, yeah, anyways. Right. I see that host threw a statement up there.
Yeah, they have a little analogy.
Okay.
Yeah, host says, protests try to make waves to clear up debris, get trash moving instead of piling up. It's gentle, or at least makes sense. A mob is a brick, usually impatient with the hope to see change quickly.
Yeah. I agree
Sometimes that brick is very massive.
Yeah, it could be. It could be massive or it could be small. I think that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's a small brick or a big brick. All right, you don't want to be in front of that brick. If it's being lobbed in your direction, you want to get the fuck out of the way, right? So, I mean, that's how I would look at it. I kind of want to discuss one last thing before we go when it comes to mob mentality specifically, that we didn't really get a chance to fully discuss. And that has to do with the social contagion element that I mentioned earlier in the episode. One of the reasons why I use the word social contagion is because, typically speaking, mobs in general don't just happen out of nowhere. They usually happen because people have a strong, passionate belief in something. Very often it's political, or it has to do with something in their particular community. And it's an injustice that they're seeing, and they're trying their best to change it. And so these mobs don't begin as mobs. They begin as peaceful protests usually. Very rarely are they just mobs of people, right? And the thing is that because of the ways in which we, I'm going to say this in the reference of Americans, we as Americans look at our ability to conduct ourselves, not just online but in person. We're really having a hard time having the hard conversations. And so when you get a divisive issue where people are protesting, it's very easy, because of how polarized we are, to turn that into a mob. And so I think that understanding the fact that the thinking and the lack thereof of effort is the part that I think is the social contagion, because we've allowed for ideologies and principles to dictate what is fair and right in the real world. And it's come at the cost, more often than not, of our own liberties. And that's something that we should really take notice of and perhaps do something about. Well, this has been an interesting episode, certainly. I appreciate everybody who showed up. And I look forward to more conversations like this in the future. I hope that you guys leave some chats, leave some comments. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Every subscriber counts, and it really helps out us getting more episodes out there to you guys. I hope you guys have a fantastic evening, and I'll see you all in the next one. Good night, everybody.